Okay, great. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the newborn screening session. I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to do this from afar. I miss being out in Ellicottville and certainly wish we all could be there together. But we've got a good crew of newborn screeners going to be providing updates on their state activities. And I'm going to start with the New York State's update, and then we'll go through the list of other states screening. This is going to be fairly short. There's more later that we'll be talking about as far as updates as part of the meeting. And just to keep things on track, I'm going to be short because there are a fair number of other states going to be presenting. Can you see my screen?
No.
Okay, hang on. It's a good thing. Better?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, great. Okay, so get rid of this. So my contact information down at the bottom of the slide for anybody who would like to catch up with me or get this information. Please feel free to give me an email or call me anytime. So New York has been screening now since 2006, and the screen has evolved through the years. Our primary biggest change is that we were at one point running LSDs together with ALD, and more in the past couple of years we actually switched and we're now running ALD separately. But the assay is similar to probably what most labs are doing as far as mass spec testing, where you punch a specimen, add cocktail solution to it, which has substrate internal standard. We do an overnight incubation, primarily because Krabbe needs that time to do the enzyme reaction. It's one of the, but we're also running Pompe and MPS1 with this assay. And very similarly, if we have positive results, we run same thing, only with a 6-plex enzyme assay, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But after incubation, there's a cleanup step with liquid-liquid extraction. Then we dry the sample and add acetonitrile water, and then analyze by mass spec. After testing, we pull all the data into an Excel program and follow the screening algorithms I'll be showing you. So this is kind of a complicated view, but as simplest way I can put it. We run Krabbe samples, and any sample that's less than 12% of the daily mean is going to be retested with a 6-plex LSD assay. And we also run the 3-plex. And if anybody wants to know the details of that, I could go over it. But they do give slightly different numbers just because of variability of the cocktail solutions. We also look for anything that's clear positive. So most of you probably have heard of the Mayo clear evaluation system, and that system is collaborative laboratory integrated reports. When we use this, occasionally it picks up positives for Krabbe that we wouldn't pick up, but most of the time what we find actually is a lot of our first screens are false positives with clear. And typically the reason for that is a lot of our positives are usually delayed specimens or repeat specimen, and those specimens have reduced Gal-C. So after the analysis with 6-plex, we run a clear test as well. And we start cyclosine if we have very low Gal-C and it looks like it could be a real case. So for example, if Krabbe is a 4% of the mean or 5% of the daily mean, and we see our other two enzymes, the enzyme for Pompe and MPS1, look very normal, that one's kind of looking like a real, an emergency case. So we start cyclosine testing on those. We also initiate DNA testing. If after the sixplex we get a clear negative or the results are greater than 12%, it would be a screen negative analysis. We have this borderline level where it's between 10 and 12%. We're actually have extended it down lower than 10 or 12. If we look at the sixplex assay and we've got an average of the enzyme activities of 50%, we use that average to adjust our Gal-C up, but we also use the clear tool. And they're both kind of, for us, the clear tool is the overriding one, but we've always been running sixplex since the past 2 years or so with this ability to do an adjust up based on the other enzyme activities. So anybody that might want to know about that could talk with me personally, but for the most part, we don't need to rely on that because the clear tool works every time. There have been times where we've had systems down on our end and we were unable to send the data to clear, so we have this other mechanism to kind of reduce false positives. So that's the algorithm for Krabbe. Since screening now, almost since 2006, we've done 3.2 million newborns, had 1,000 that we've sequenced for follow-up due to second tier testing. Out of that 1,000, 460 were low activity polymorphisms. And those are babies that we see one or more variants that are lowering the activity, but they're not considered disease-causing variants. They're going to be benign variants, well-known benign variants. 558 of these, of the 3.2 million, have gone on for counseling, and we do at that point Gal-C activity testing in leukocytes. In the old way of thinking of this, we had 75 moderate risk and then 46 high risk. These high-risk babies are really being closely evaluated. We've, over time, determined that a lot of them really aren't high risk, and we'll talk more about that with some of the information in the next session. But since screening, New York has found 6 early infantile Krabbe cases and 2 infantile Krabbe cases. So that's our kind of from the big number down to the small numbers. Now this is just a quick update since they're ALD. We're going to be discussing ALD as well. In New York's ALD screening, we've screened 1.3 million and 112 infants have been referred. This is our referral rate, 0.074%. That holds. This number here is a little old, but we're still in the similar range for referral rate. We have 37 boys we've detected. Incidence calculates to 1 in almost 17 or 18,000. Females, we've done 1 in 17,000. And so far we've found 20 cases that are other peroxisomal biogenesis disorders for an incidence of about 1 in 65,000. We know of a couple of false positives where we don't know really if they're false positives, but everything is leading to, there's variants in the gene, but the very long chain fatty acids are normal. These are very likely just benign variants that have slightly elevated the very long, the marker that we're using for screening. And the last thing I would say about ALD incidence rates, they all assume that boys and girls, all the boys and girls will develop symptoms at some point. So these are kind of, we've been referring to them as genetically and biochemically confirmed ALD cases, but for the most part, most of these newborns have not developed symptoms. So that's the overview. If there are any questions, I can take those. Otherwise, we can move on to the next state.
Thank you, Dr. Orsini.
Sure.
I don't see any questions in the chat, so I think we're good to move on to the next state. So up next we have Tracy Klug from Missouri.
Hi, Anna. Okay, I'm going to share my screen here. Can you see my screen? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so yes, I'm Tracy. I'm the chief of the newborn screening laboratory here in Missouri. Thanks to Hunter's Hope for letting me give an update of our screening here. So in Missouri, we screen about 78,000 newborns each year, but we receive about 93,000 samples each year because of our second screens. So we test about an average of 300 specimens each working day. Our lab is fully operational 6 days per week. We started our full population Krabbe screening in August of 2012, initially through the New York newborn screening program, and then we began Krabbe testing in-house August of 2015. So this is just a look at our laboratory. We use a fluorometric bench assay for Gal-C. We don't have a lot of equipment that's required for it. We just have the fluorometer there and an incubator. And then our workflow for our assay is also pretty simple. We just start with extracting the dry blood spot. We add 10 microliters of the substrate to each well of a new plate. Then we transfer 10 microliters of the sample extract from step 1 into that plate from step 2. We seal the plate and incubate overnight. And then in the morning, we add stop buffer, add calibrants, and then we read the plates in the fluorometer. So pretty simple, straightforward. This is just a look at our Gal-C activities of various disease categories. So we've detected a couple of infantile cases that are in the blue bar there. The unknown onset are in the red. The variants of uncertain significance are in the green. The pseudodeficiencies are orange, and then the carriers are in the purple. And then these are just some of our proficiency tests. But you can see that there's pretty decent separation between our false positives and our true positives. So this is our original starting algorithm for Krabbe screening. As you can see, we start with that screening test, and we look at the Gal-C result. If it's below our cutoff, we retest in duplicate. Then we take the average of the 3 runs, and we would assess the risk, and we would determine if it was a borderline risk, we just needed a second screen, or if it needed the second tier 30 kb deletion testing. So if the 30 kb deletion was present, even one copy, we referred those samples for follow-up testing. If the 30 kb deletion was not present, then we looked to see if the Gal-C level was below a fail-safe low cutoff. And then if it was, then we referred those as well for follow-up testing. So as of March of this year, we received approval to send samples for Zizekis testing at Mayo. So now we changed our algorithm. So we start with the screening test again. We look at that average Gal-C. If the average is below our cutoff, then we just send those immediately to Mayo for Zizekis testing. So we've eliminated that borderline category. And then if Zizekis is abnormal, we would refer those samples. Again, if Zizekis is normal, we're still just, out of an abundance of caution, we are referring those samples for follow-up testing as well. Okay, so our findings to date, we tested, by the end of 2019, we tested about 557,000 newborns. We had 197 positive screens. 2 of those turned out to have early infantile Krabbe disease, 2 have unknown onset Krabbe disease. There were 10 variants of uncertain significance, 12 pseudodeficiencies, 138 carriers, 27 were normal, 5 parents refused follow-up testing, and then 1 was lost to follow-up. And then a quick look at our future plans. We are planning later this year to start our validation studies for XALD, so we're really looking forward to that. And then special thanks to Lacey Vermette, Heather Blue, and the Missouri newborn screening team, our laboratory and our follow-up team, our LSD task force, Dr. Orsini, and the New York team, and Babies Incorporated. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Any questions for Tracy? I don't see any in the chat. I know it takes a while to type, so we can always go back. But for now, we can move on to Dr. Wei from Kentucky.
Can you hear me? Let me share
Yes.
my screen.
Great.
you see my screen?
We can.
Yes.
Okay. As you know, I'm part-time medical director in the Kentucky laboratory services. I work in the Department of Pathology of University of Kentucky. Since we out-resource our Kentucky newborn screening for Krabbe, Pompe, and MPS 1 and XLD to male, so here I just update our outcome result. Let me see. Okay, so this is our lab, in Kentucky. We start screening Krabbe, Pompe, and MPS 1 since February 2016. Screening XLD in July 2018. The male clinic receives specimen Monday to Saturday. Our yearly volume was about 55,000 births. So the Kentucky population, majority are white. So you can see 88% are white, about 8% are blacks, 5% is particle races, about 2% is Asian, 4% is Hispanic, and the other minority. Here are two tables. The upper one is we get a referral. The bottom one is the outcome. As you know, the Mayo Clinic, they do the first tier test. They measure the 6 enzyme, the 6 flags for the 6 enzyme activity, including our GALC, the galactose cerebrosidase, and the GAA and IDUA, as well as 4 LPCs. So once they have this decreased activity, they automatically do the second tier test. For Krabbe, they do sexing and the 30 kb deletion. For MPS 1, they do those 3 DS, HS, and KS using LC tandem mass. For Pompe, they second tier test, they use the tested creatine and the creatinine by flow injection analysis tandem mass. For XLD, they use the LC tandem mass for those PLC. So in 2016, we had 1 positive case refer and 1 confirmed Krabbe. And there's none since 2017 to now, up to now. For Pompe, 2016, we referred 1 case. We had 1 diagnosed. In 2017, we had 3 and 3 diagnosed as a Pompe, real Pompe. 2018, we refer 8 cases, 6 positive diagnoses, and 2 negative. In 2019, we have 3 referred, 1 negative, 1 extremely preemie expired before we get the diagnosis. Up to July 2020, we have 4 referral, 2 diagnosed, 1 carrier, 1 pending. For MPS 1, 2016, we referred 2, get 1 diagnosis and 1 carrier. In 2017, we don't have any, but we have a 4th negative diagnosed by the clinical presentation. For 2018, we do not have any. 2019, we have 1 referral and 1 diagnosis. So XLD, we start screening 2018, we have 1 referral and 1 diagnosis. And 2019, we have 2 cases, referral, 2 diagnosed. So you can tell here, by the second tier test, the positive predictive value is very high. So there's just a couple of false positive. Based on our population, let's see our birth rate, birth incidence in our state. So Krabbe, as you know, we have 1 case over 245,000. So compared to the reported one, it's very in line with the reported prevalence. And the Pompeii, we referred 19 total. We had a diagnosis, 13. The birth incidence in Kentucky, 4 in between. There's 1/19,000, 4 in between they reported. And MPS 1, we have 3 diagnosis cases. So the birth incidence is 1 over about 82,000. So it's pretty higher than the reported. XLD, we have 3 true positive we have diagnosed. So the birth incidence is 1 over 33,000. So based on this, our the screening program, here, and Mayo Clinic lab, doing a very good job, I want to say. So let's look at the genetics. What are the mutations we identified for our positive cases? So for the GAL enzyme, we have one presumptively earlier infantile Krabbe based on the GAL enzyme lower cyclosine increased and negative for this. So later genotype, we find 2 mutations. One we know for sure is a pathogenic, but other one is VOS. So, but based on cyclosine, we think it is early infantile since they this baby transferred to Duke and had a transplant so early. And the later outcome, we think it is early infantile, but it is infantile. It is early onset, we don't know. So he get admitted to Duke and get a transplant at the day of life, 24 days. So that's the Krabbe case. For the Pompeii, all our 13 cases identified are late onset. So we have 13 positive, 1 carrier. So totally we have 27 chromosomes. So among the 27 chromosomes, we have 17 this splicing mutation. This is predicted to be late onset. The second common one is this one, is tryptophan change to cysteine. So it is also next the common late onset mutation. The third one is exon 18 deletion. This one predicted is severe pathogenic mutation. Common in Dutch population, we have 2 alleles of that. The rest are very rare but recurrent. We have the pseudo deficiency found in 2 alleles. One is carried, other with the positive diagnostic cases. So this is the most common pseudo alleles reported. So not surprising. For MPS 1, we have 3 positive cases. Among these 3 cases and the carrier 7 chromosome, we do have this worldwide most common allele, the mutation find, tryptophan at codon 402. The next one is glutamine at 17, codon 70. So it is also the most common pathogenic. So the rest are rare, but some of them are recurrent. For XLD, we have 3 cases. All these 3 alleles are rare, recurrent in the literature. So based on our experience, our birth incidents are very in line with the reported prevalence, and the mutation represent our population. So that's all from Kentucky. So thank you. If you have any question, just text me.
Thank you, Dr. Wei. Next, we have Dr. Margie Ream from Ohio.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
All right, so, okay, so you should all be able to see my slides, right, Anna? Okay, great. So I'm on the Ohio Newborn Screening Advisory Council, but none of our actual lab personnel were able to join in today. So they provided these slides for me to provide you all with our update. So conditions are generally added to the Ohio Newborn Screen through recommendation by our advisory council, and Ohio is not bound to follow the RUSP. And generally the time from council recommendation to law implementation is to law becoming law is 6 months, and it takes much longer for actual implementation. But through the efforts of many advocates, Krabbe was added by legislative action with a plan to go live in July of 2016. So we've been screening for Krabbe for 4 years now. The legislation is written in a way that allows parents to specifically opt out of Krabbe while receiving the rest of the newborn screening panel in Ohio. And the initial legislation prohibited second-tier testing, so we were really, and even currently today, we're really bound to only testing GAL-C activity through the state lab. That legislation was edited last year, so now we're allowed to do second-tier testing and allowed to do psychosine, but we haven't implemented that yet. MPS 1 and Pompe were added through multiplexing in the same assay with Krabbe, with tests being run in 2016, but the official go live was in 2017 for MPS 1 and Pompe. So we used tandem mass spec, and based on 3.5 years worth of experience, we screened about 500,000 newborn screens. And one thing that the Ohio lab uses is a hard cutoff of enzyme activity of less than 0.65 micromoles per liter per hour. We actually reduced that cutoff earlier this year from 0.7. We don't use a % of the daily mean. This cutoff, though, does run between 9.4 and 11.2% of the mean, depending on the season. All of our true cases were less than 8% of the daily mean, and we have 7 confirmed cases listed in this table. Now, the definition of the diagnosis is based on what's reported to the newborn screening lab, and our lab is legally bound to not do long-term follow-up. We hopefully will pursue permission to do additional follow-up, but right now, once an initial diagnosis is received and reported to the newborn screening lab, they're not allowed to recontact the physicians to see what the later outcomes were. We've had two cases that were reported to the Ohio Newborn Screening Lab as severe infantile, and 5 reported as late onset. You can see their GAL-C activity and the % of the daily mean listed in this table, and they're well below the 0.65 and 8% cutoffs, except for that last case was right at the 8% cutoff. So if we have an abnormal result, we repeat in duplicate, and if the retest doesn't agree, then we retest again in duplicate. And then, of course, we also look at all 3 lysosomal enzymes to see if it was just a bad sample. And all 3 are low, then we request a new sample. For a parental opt-out, it's been really pretty stable at 1.5% over the years. And so that's 1.5% of new parents that when they are given this sheet of paper, they're very briefly told you have an option to opt out. They get something that they can read. 1.5% of parents have opted out specifically of Krabbe. If they opt out of Krabbe, we still do MPS 1 and Pompe. The opt-out data is really not very detailed as far as the epidemiology, but it does not seem to cluster in specific counties. So we do have some counties that are very urban, some very rural, and some that are primarily Amish and Mennonite. And so this 1.5% opt-out is really kind of across the board. We collect most of our screens between 24 and 48 hours of life, and 81% arrive in the lab within 48 hours of collection. So that could push it as far as day 4 of life. Low risk results are reported within 3 days. Elevated risk results, of course, have to be repeated to be confirmed, and those are reported within an average of 5 days. The abnormal results are called to pediatricians and in some cases specialists, and the lab does not contact families directly. We, as I mentioned, perform only short-term follow-up through our public health nurses contacting pediatricians and specialists, and we follow up until a diagnosis is reported or until 1 year of age, whichever comes first. For our Krabbe screening, we've had just over 500,000 screens, representing approximately the same number of unique infants. As I mentioned, a 1.5% opt-out rate. And we have identified 303 infants that were identified as at risk based solely on GALC activity. So all of these patients have to be referred because the lab doesn't have a second tier testing algorithm yet. So the percent positive of all the screened is 0.055%. Of those, we had about 10% lost to follow-up. We have 10 total patients with diagnosis still pending, and of all those, we had 2 confirmed early infantile cases. So the positive predictive value is 0.77%. Our positive screens, final diagnosis is listed here. The vast majority are unaffected, are carriers, or contain a pseudodeficiency or variant that reduces enzyme activity but is not disease causing. We had 7 possible late onset cases, 2 early infantile cases, 10 pending, and 30 lost to follow-up. For MPS 1, we identified 118 patients at elevated risk that had to be referred, with a 0.033% of screens being positive. 8 of those were lost to follow-up, and 3 had confirmed positive Hurler syndrome with a positive predictive value of 2.97%. Our positive screens, final diagnosis shows the vast majority are pseudodeficiency allele carriers. For Pompe, we had 36 positive screens with 1 lost to follow-up, 14 with possible late onset disease, 3 with non-classic possible early onset, and 3 with confirmed positive the classical phenotype with early onset. So our positive predictive value for the classic early onset is 11%. So we actually have identified quite a few late onset cases here, and some unaffecteds did screen positive. So to kind of summarize, our positive predictive value for the lab reporting out newborn screening for early infantile Krabbe is 0.8. For any variant of Krabbe is 3.5%. Numbers are a little better for Hurler and even better for Pompe. I do expect that these Krabbe numbers will improve as we figure out how to incorporate our new found legal ability to have a second tier test. For ALD, it has been added to the Ohio panel, and we have been working in our state to do some infrastructure upgrades to allow for new equipment and new electrical capacity, but they are actually running the assay now to optimize the equipment, and hopefully we'll be screening patients as kind of a pilot process soon, with the final go live population level screening later this year. And we do plan to add Psychosine to our algorithm, and we're still working out the details on that. So I just want to say a special thank you to Sharon Leonard, who's our lab director at the Ohio Department of Health. She provided these slides and data for me, and has really been a great resource to helping identify patients that are at risk for these conditions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ream. We have several questions for you in the chat, but if it's okay, I want to come back to those at the end of this session. But if you want to go ahead and read through those, you can start thinking about your answers. Okay, up next we have Dr. George Zizekis from Tennessee.
Trying to see if I can get my screen shared.
There it is. That's perfect.
Okay. I'm going to briefly just go over where we are now in screening for Krabbe disease and XALD. we began this by screening for the lysosomal disorders back in 2017. And actually, initially we used reagents made by PerkinElmer. This was before they had their neo-LSD kit. And so we screened for Pompe, MPS1, Gaucher, Fabry, in addition to Krabbe. And in interpreting the Krabbe results, we do that similarly to New York. And actually, our cutoff is very similar to it. I believe 12% of the daily median. We use median rather than mean to avoid skewing of the data. In any event, recently we've switched to the PerkinElmer neo-LSD assay, and we use clear analysis in evaluating the results. Now, all of this is done at the newborn screening lab in Nashville, and Christine Dorley is the chief of that laboratory. So I work with her on various projects, and I have attended this meeting before, and when I was with the state of Illinois. So this is just to update where we are. Not much has changed since the last meeting. We have found 2 late onset Krabbe diseases and no early infantiles. One thing we've changed, and this is out of about 260,000 babies screened. One thing we changed in April of this year, we had been sending any of the ones that screened positive off for DNA sequencing, but now we do a second-tier biochemical test by sending it to PerkinElmer for cytosine, and if it's above 1.5 nanomolar, then it goes for sequencing. All right. Now all I have to do is figure out how to get the next slide. Oops, there it is. Okay, so here's the summary of screening for XALD. This was begun more recently, and we've screened about 186,000 babies. This is done separately from the lysosomal disorders. It's a simple extraction in methanol and run on tandem mass spec, and then those that have elevated levels of a couple of the very long chain fatty acids are reflexed to LC mass spec. And of 23 presumed positives, 5 males were confirmed, no females. And this was done by DNA sequencing of the ABCD gene. And there have been a few infant girls that have been sent out for sequencing, but so far there's nothing significant or very interpretable from that. And we have found 1 peroxisomal disorder in a male. So that's where we are currently, and I think I'll stop there and let the next person share their summary. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dizikes. So up next, we're going to hear from Dr. Basheeruddin from Illinois. He's still on here. Oh, there you are. Are you able to unmute? We can't hear you. So go ahead, Melissa.
Yeah, I'm trying to unmute, but it's not working. So I'm not sure. You might have to select the audio from your Zoom toolbar area.
Why don't we let him try to figure that out, and we'll move on to Miriam from New Jersey. Is Miriam on the call?
Yes, I am.
Hi, Miriam.
Hello. Sorry, I'm not seeing my head. All right, let me start sharing. There we go. All right. can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right. There we go. All right, so I'm going to talk about the New Jersey's experience. Right now we are screening for Krabbe disease, although we are in the beginning stages of getting ready to screen for XALD as well. So we are legislatively mandated to screen for Krabbe, Pompe, Gaucher, Fabry, and Niemann-Pick. That was all passed as one package deal. And then we had a second law mandating screening of MPS 1. So we currently screen for those 6 disorders. We began just about 1 year ago. So we're just at our 1 year mark. So that was very exciting for us. And we use reagents from PerkinElmer, and we're actually in the process of validating the PerkinElmer Neo-LSD kit. So we use the tandem mass spectrometry. So very briefly, our screening algorithm is pretty similar to some of the other ones that you've heard about today. Our cutoff is based on % of the daily median. So if we have a specimen with less than 15% GALC activity, we retest that in duplicate, and we also do molecular analysis for second tier testing. So we do both a 30 kb deletion analysis as well as Sanger sequencing. So in order to expedite the timing, we begin retesting and begin the sequencing process at the same time. We wait until we have the retest GALC activity, and we have a lower cutoff for retest, which is 11%. So if the specimen has less than 11% of the daily median GALC activity, we finish the sequencing, and those those results are immediately communicated to our follow-up group, who then reach out to the geneticists in our state, who it's actually the geneticist is the point of referral for our state. They then reach out to the PCPs to bring the babies in to be evaluated clinically. So again, our second tier testing is molecular. We are not currently doing any cyclazine testing. So we generate 2 reports. One is our main newborn screening report, which this is an example of what it looks like. It just tells what that GALC was abnormal and what the % for that specimen was. And then we generate a supplemental sequencing report. All of our referrals are based on enzyme activity. So we refer whether we find any pathogenic variants or not. So kind of whatever variants we find, that's great, but everything is referred based on enzyme activity level. So our supplemental sequencing report is really supplemental information that the geneticists use, but it does not play an integral part in our algorithm. So as I said, we've been screening for 1 year. So I'll just give a brief summary of how that year went. We screened 96,416 newborns in the year. Our birth rate is just under 100,000. Of those, we had 34 infants who were referred with low GALC enzyme activity. We had 0 confirmed cases of early infantile Krabbe disease, and we had 1 confirmed late onset Krabbe disease. And that is where we stand right now. So thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. Okay, up next, I think we're going to skip on to Angela Gumby from Pennsylvania until we know that Illinois is ready to go. Hi, Angela.
Good morning. I just want to make sure I bring up the right presentation here. Okay, can everyone see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay. One moment. Okay, one moment, because I have two screens here, and I think it's trying to pick up both of my screens, because one has the notes on it, and one has the presentation. Okay, I'll be ready in one moment. Okay. Okay, are we ready?
Yep.
You able to see?
I don't see your screen, no.
You don't? Okay, one moment. And I tested this just in case. All right, can you see it now?
No, I can't.
Oh no, one moment.
Do you want us to, we can, I think Dr. Basheeruddin is ready, so let's go to him while you're
Okay.
getting those, and we'll come back to you, okay?
Okay, that's fine, thank you.
All right, so let's hear from Illinois.
All right, let me stop the screen sharing if that's on.
So can you see my screen?
Yes, and we can hear you.
You can hear me?
Yes, sir.
Good, thank you. Thanks for being patient.
Of course.
Okay. I'll be describing Illinois experience, and just to give you an idea, our average volume for each year is about 170,000 specimens. And we initiated a screening for 5 lysosomes, lysosomal storage diseases, consisting of enzymes IDUA, GLA, GAA, ABG, and ASM around June 2015. Then 2 more enzymes were added in the panel in December 2017. And these enzymes consisted of GALC and I2S. Briefly, our assay, we do assay on 2 separate 96 well plate. One is used for 6-plex assay, and the other one is for MPS2. They were incubated separately. And after adding inhibitors, substrates, internal standards, all that, we incubate these plates for 17 hours at 37 degrees centigrade. And then we stop reaction by adding acetonitrile, and then we pull these 2 plates, and we analyze these plates on MSMS spectrometry, and at the front end, we use UPLC column. We do not do any liquid extraction or solid phase extraction. We basically inject directly to UPLC column. And we do approximately 500 injections per instrument per day. And we change column guards around 2,500 injections, and columns are usually changed around 10,000 injections. I'll be describing only Krabbe results for this presentation. So briefly about Krabbe logic, here what we do is we analyze a specimen as a single dried blood spots. And if the GALC activity is lower than or equal to 16% of the median activity, and this median is based on the plate median, or we sometimes pool plates, sometimes we use individual plates for calculating medians. So if activity is less than 16%, we repunch that dried blood spots as a 5 spots, and then we run second analysis, and then we calculate the average of repeat 5 punches. And if the activity is less than 13% of median activity, then we send out for second tier testing. And our second tier testing includes measurement of cytosine, presence or absence of 30 kilobase deletion, and full gene sequencing. And our results are as follows. So far, between December 2017 to December 2019, we screened 338,000 specimens, and we repeated 435 specimens. And out of 435, we sent out 152 specimens which had lower than 13% of the median GALC activity. And if you see the table below, the GALC activity less than 13, we send it out, and as soon as we get cytosine result, which happens within 2 days, around 2 to 3 days, if cytosine activity is greater than 8.7 nanomolar, then we immediately refer these babies for follow-ups. We call diagnosis as positive. And if cytosine level is between 1.08 to less than 8.7, we hold those results and we call pending status until we get further results on the sequencing. And this is our summary of the data. And here we have, so far, as I said earlier, 152 samples were sent out for second tier testing. Out of those, 102 samples had pseudodeficiency alleles, and their cytosine level was between 1.08 to 1.98 nanomolar. And there were 12 specimens identified containing variation of variants of unknown sequence, and 22 specimens had one pathogenic allele or contains heterozygous 30 kilobase deletion, one copy. So in the specimens having VUS and one pathogenic mutation, they are also labeled or called out as positive and followed up by the specialist. And at that point, they make decision whether that babies need to be further followed or not. We also had 2 specimens, 2 baby infants identified as late onset. Their cytosine level were between 2 to 6 nanomolar, and they contain pathogenic mutation. And 2 infants are also identified as Krabbe positive. Infantile diagnosis was given to them, and they had cytosine level between 10 and 35 nanomolar. And as we all know that the dried blood spot sometimes contains various amount of cells, and they have some other situations where the enzyme activity may not be optimal. So what we did was we normalized all GALC activities, and out of 152 specimens, 4 specimens which were diagnosed are shown on the right-hand side. And if we normalized with 6 enzymes and 2 enzymes, so if you see those 2 box and Wixer plot, both normalization resulted in negative activity for us. And on the right-hand side, which were diagnosed cases, after normalization, either with 6 enzymes or 2 enzymes, I'm referring to 2 enzyme means IDOA and GAA, which is a RUSP recommended enzyme. So if we do normalization, then we don't see variation in the enzyme activities. We have not implemented this at this time. And also, we have not implemented new cytosine guidelines, which is if the cytosine level is less than 1.5 nanomolar, then those specimens are not followed for, or at least recommended not to be followed for further sequencing. And this is my last slide. And as I presented 338,000 approximately that is specimens. Out of that, 152 were sent out, and 4 were diagnosed. So our positive predictive value is 2.6%. Whereas if we normalize with IDUA or GAA, or with 6 enzyme, our positive predictive value is pretty reasonable. And of course, if we imply cytosine and sequencing results, we get positive predictive value close to 100%. And I thank for all technical staff, past and present, as well as supporting staff at Office of Health Promotion, Springfield, Illinois. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Angela, are you ready?
Yes, I think so. I apologize for that.
No worries.
All right.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present information about Pennsylvania's newborn screening program. I'm Angela Gumby, and I'm the Dry Blood Spot Coordinator for our state's newborn screening program. Our state has 2 newborn screening panels. I talked about this a little bit last year, and the conditions on our mandatory screening panel are required at birth, but conditions on our follow-up panel are not considered or considered supplemental and not required. Now I'll talk a little bit regarding the evolution of LSD and leukodystrophy screening in Pennsylvania. On the state level, Newborn Screening Child Testing Act 148 was amended October 15th of 2014, and that was to include 6 LSDs: Pompe, Hurler syndrome or MPS 1, loboid cell leukodystrophy or Krabbe disease, Fabry, Niemann-Pick, and Gaucher. In the fall of 2015, our Newborn Screening and Follow-Up Technical Advisory Board, or TAB, addressed the amendment and recommended Pompe be placed on our mandatory panel and the other 5 LSDs be on our follow-up panel. So after required program review and changes like to the system, on February 5th of 2016, Act 148 was implemented so LSD screening could be done, and for Pompe, this also included DNA sequencing. Now on the federal level, on February 16th of 2016, another LSD, MPS 1, and adrenoleukodystrophy, XALD, they were added to the RUST. So our TAB made more recommendations, and once approved, MPS 1 and XALD were added to our mandatory panel. Then formal screening began on February 1st, 2017 for MPS 1 and April 1st, 2017 for XALD. So this slide summarizes screening decisions for the 6 LSDs and XALD, and this is what Pennsylvania is currently doing. Now I'll talk a little bit about program and policy information. All newborns are required to be screened for conditions on our mandatory panel unless a parent refuses, and certain exceptions are allowed per our state regulations. Filter paper or DBS submitters are hospitals, birthing centers, and midwives, and they decide which conditions are tested for based on their contract with PerkinElmer Laboratory. But additional tests can be performed at the request of the PCP or the parent. In Pennsylvania, Hershey Medical Center is the only birthing hospital that is currently screening for all LSDs based on their contract. Last, I wanted to provide an update regarding House Bill 730, which was introduced April of 2019. And we also have a companion Senate Bill 983, which was introduced December of 2019. These are basically the same bill, but we're pushing them through two different avenues. And the bills propose implementing a newborn screening fee here in Pennsylvania, as well as merging our screening panels. Krabbe is recommended to be on the mandatory panel, but Fabry, Name the Pick, and Gaucher will no longer be offered. However, our birthing submitters could still request testing from the lab. Now, the bill is moving through the legislative process here in Pennsylvania, and we are hopeful that it will be enacted this year. I'd also like to take this time to thank our parent advocate, Lisa Brackbill, for all of her efforts in assisting with moving that bill. The next few slides are going to give a high-level breakdown of the 7 conditions with the number of newborn screened, the number of specimens replicated, which means they had multiple filter papers submitted, and the number of referrals to one of our contracted treatment centers for follow-up care and confirmatory diagnosis. The total number of occurrent births in Pennsylvania is noted for comparison, and mandatory condition totals are close to the number of occurrent births, as you can see. Conditions on the follow-up panel represent about 2% of the screening totals. And that's because, again, that is a supplemental or optional test, except for if the baby is born at Hershey Medical Center. Now, during the last 4 calendar years, 2016, 17, 18, and 19, 2 referrals were made to a treatment center for a condition on our follow-up panel, and they were for Niemann-Pick in 2019. For patients who are actually or were actually followed for one of the LSDs, the condition was found due to symptoms that presented later or by other testing, but they were not identified by newborn screening. So for 2019 data, you can see that information on the screen. I'm just going to quickly scroll through the data for 2018, which you can see, again, the number of referrals that were made to a treatment center. And as I stated, for the LSDs, particularly the supplemental LSDs at the bottom, Krabbe, Fabry, and Niemann-Pick, and Gaucher, we have not had any positive cases. There's our data for 2017. And then 2016, and that's when a lot of the activity happened with some of the implementation. So those numbers are slightly lower. Excuse me. Our state has a general testing algorithm. I'm just going to talk about that for one moment. And that is an LSD algorithm. So the process is the same for all conditions, regardless of what screening panel the condition is on. But if Krabbe is added to our mandatory screening panel, there will be a specific algorithm for that condition. We do have a LSD subcommittee here in Pennsylvania, and that has discussed that criteria regarding the condition, including how to interpret the cyclosine value. And we will also consider recommendations from the National Krabbe Consortium when the algorithm is available for publication. We do have Dr. Maria Escalar on the telephone, and she is with the Division of Genetics at Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh, and she has been part of the national discussions. So she will be providing our state with information in the future, and I just want to take the time to thank Dr. Escalar for her expertise and support. Other potential changes in the future include, we recommend adding MPS2 and MLD to our mandatory panel, but we are also waiting to see what the RUS decides first before making any decisions. And then internally, our LSD subcommittee is forming a consortium between our metabolic treatment centers to share screening algorithms and procedures, and that will assist with making decisions about difficult cases. Overall, our state will continue to follow national and individual state recommendations and trends. Pennsylvania's Department of Health's website is an excellent resource where you can obtain information about our program. And we just want to mention that at birth, parents are and have been given a brochure explaining newborn screening, and they're also given information about LSDs in a separate brochure. And the LSD brochure can be downloaded in several different languages from our website. So in closing, Pennsylvania has a lot of activities surrounding LSDs and leukodystrophies, and we will continue to make changes to improve our program, testing, and outcomes as needed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angela. Okay, up next we have Barb Lesko from Indiana.
Hello, I'm sorry, I have a very informal talk here. We just started screening live in Indiana in July of 2020, so we're in the infancy stages of screening. We did start looking in 2019 in terms of selecting a method. We decided to go with a mass spec method after talking with programs using both the digital microfluidics and the mass spec method, pros and cons, and how it would best incorporate into our lab. We received our first instrument in January of this year, had installation optimization and training occur at that time, January, February. And then we received our second Q site in March, and then the pandemic hit. So then we had the task of trying to bring up new testing with in a pandemic type situation where we had to adjust our staffing and trying to maintain testing while still bringing on new methods, new testing, and we were able to do that successfully. We're still working on some of our LIS issues, but we were able basically to be ready by the first part of June to do a population type pilot with samples from June so we could simulate what an actual day would look like for us day after day. We knew we were going to go from a 6-day work week to a 7-day work week because of the 18-hour incubation required for Krabbe screening. We're still working on the timing of things. We work 10-hour days, and so we were used to same-day reporting. So it's been a challenge trying to keep in mind timeliness of reporting, but the limitations of requiring an overnight incubation for a disorder. So in June, we did about 3.5 weeks worth of samples. So we screened close to 7,000 samples. We sent 2 for second tier testing for MPS 1 and 1 for Krabbe. For Krabbe, our testing algorithm is that we will screen all babies ×1. Any baby that has an enzyme, single enzyme, GALC enzyme level lower than the 15% of the daily median will get repeated in duplicate, and then we apply a 12% cutoff. Anything that is equal to or less than 12% of the daily median for GALC will go on for second tier testing. We are sending to PerkinElmer Genetics for simultaneous cycosine and 30 kb deletion. We will hold that preliminary report until we get those second tier test results back, at which time we will report an overall result incorporating those second tier. Second tier result would be anything abnormal, abnormals molecularly or abnormal cycosine, and that will then go on for follow-up. We did send 1 during our pilot, like I said, to PerkinElmer that was normal. we are, like I said, in the infancy stages of this. We are looking to add clear to our evaluation. We will continue to evaluate our screening algorithm. You know, we received samples from Minnesota, Missouri, Illinois, and New Jersey, and their help was invaluable for us to be able to look at setting some cutoffs. And I expect that as we gain more experience and as we are able to correlate second tier with what our first tier results are, that we'll make some adjustments. In terms of ALD, Indiana did pass a bill mandating ALD screening in July of 2021. So we will look at preparing for that later this year. And so that will, at that time, that'll put Indiana screening for the full RESP recommendations plus Krabbe.
Thank you so much, Barb.
Thank you.
We appreciate you joining us, and welcome to our symposium. We're glad to have Indiana here for sure.
Thank you so much.
Okay, finally, we're going to hear from Kimberly Seals from South Carolina.
Good morning. Let me share my screen real quick. All right, can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes.
All right, great. I'm not sure how we're doing on time, but I will be very brief for the sake of time. Good morning, everyone. I'm Kimberly Seals. I'm the director for the Bureau of Maternal and Child Health at South Carolina DHEC. My contact information is at the end of this presentation. I am stepping in for our lab director who could not be here today, Dr. Atwell Coleman, who's relatively new, but as many of you are likewise working COVID, so is he. So I have just a brief update surrounding South Carolina's newborn screening program. Just a little bit of a background, and let me go into presentation mode here. Our newborn screening program is unique, but the agency is unique as we're one of 3 agencies across the country that still has both environmental and health in one agency. But our newborn screening program is jointly operated under the agency in 2 different bureaus. We operate both out of the Public Health Lab as well as the Bureau of Maternal and Child Health. So our Public Health Lab provides all of the newborn screening lab tests, and the Bureau of Maternal and Child Health provides the linkage to care for all identified newborns with metabolic formula disorders. And we do provide that follow-up as well as any type of needs free of charge. For the newborn screening program, just a little bit of a highlight here, we do screen over 55,000 babies every year through the newborn screening lab. We also result over 8,000 abnormal cases to healthcare providers every year. In 2019 alone, someone is requesting control of my slides. In 2019 alone, we did confirm over 115 newborn screening disorders. We identified over 3,000 carriers of newborn screening disorders, and we did, as I mentioned just a moment ago, provide metabolic formula to South Carolina residents with an inborn error of metabolism at no cost to the patient. And we do that through the Title V block grant. So as many of the states reported out, they're already underway with their Krabbe screening. South Carolina recently had Krabbe added to the panel last year. So the South Carolina Code of Law 443735 added MPS 1, Pompe, Krabbe to the panel on in May of last year. And this addition to the panel was contingent upon the availability of public funding. We did put in a budget request. Right now we're operating under a continuing resolution, and we're hoping to have a budget passed later this year where we we'll find out at that time if the budget for the addition of these conditions has been included. Lab validation studies are underway, as well as the algorithms and protocols for the addition of Pompe and MPS1. Many of the conditions that was a part of Dillon's Law were already on the schedule, if you will, to be added to the South Carolina panel. So we had already began progress on some of this work. So Pompe and MPS1 is a part of that work, and we are slated to start in early 2021. Validation studies will follow for ALD, and then Krabbe will hopefully come shortly behind that. And so I think I went the wrong way. So that appears to be the end, but we also have a small team that is working with the Newborn Screening Advisory Committee to review other disorders. The Newborn Screening Advisory Committee also provides a lot of input on the addition of conditions. They provided a lot of input with the addition of Krabbe, MPS1, and some of the other LSDs, and we did reach out to a number of other states that are on the call today. I wouldn't even say we're in infancy. We're just still in very much the planning, pre-planning, and validation for the ones that are coming on in early 2021. So right now we are just pulling together all of the information needed, the screening, the validation, working with Perk and Elmo on several fronts, and we'll continue to do so as we bring on these new conditions. And that's all for me today.